Hey, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for joining on time, 11 o'clock. I'm here with the wonderful Sarah Maffey. Hi, Sarah.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. I am thrilled for this conversation. I almost I really couldn't sleep last night just thinking about more questions and things to talk about because urban planning, placemaking, this whole topic is really something in the last 2 years that I've jumped into, and it's
Mhm.
really opened my eyes to real estate. So let me tell everybody that's here who you are. Before we go into this awesome conversation. So Sarah is the principal of Here Anywhere. I will post a link afterwards. You can find her on LinkedIn, but her name is spelled Maffey. She's a placemaker, innovator, strategist. Her background's in urban design, economic development. She actually had an appointment from the White House for one of her roles, which is amazing. She's worked in commercial real estate. She has a Yale MBA, which I only tout because she would not, because she is a super cool person who is but she has a Yale MBA. She's went to NYU. She studied urban planning. Like, she's a master of her space, a known speaker and contributor. She really focuses on, you know, uh, you know, what creates a sense of place, right? And what are the experiences that drive social connectivity, business value for tenants, for landlords in their communities? And to me, this is core real estate. And in the real estate world, the traditional real estate world, we don't talk about a lot of these things. She also happens to be a certified yoga teacher, a big
Namaste.
traveler,
Uh-huh.
and a very cool, awesome person. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
And you have such a great career. So maybe can you give us, before we jump into it, a couple highlights? Just like I touched on a couple, like you had your White House, placement with economic development, and you also have your time at Transwestern. Can you give
Mhm.
us a quick sort of like high level, like what those roles were like, what you did?
Yeah, my time at Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration was, I think, really seminal to what I'm doing now. We were partnering with Michael Porter out of Harvard and working on developing industry clusters around the country, which really kind of opened my mind to all the different pieces of an ecosystem that need to be developed. And it's so kind of integral to how do I think about real estate now, actually. And I had a chance to put all that together at Transwestern with placemaking and really repositioning assets and thinking about tenant mix and amenity mix and just the overall experience of being in a building.
That's awesome. That's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. And so let's go back for a second, because I think one of the big values of this conversation is going to be like how you got into this space,
Mm.
right? And so others can really learn and understand like about this space. So like, how did you get into this business of placemaking, of like building cities, of urban planning? Like, how did that start?
Well, it started with me being a huge nerd in college, and I started with my thesis at NYU about placemaking along the Lower East River. And it was really after September 11th, a lot of the businesses were closing because streets were still closed, even many blocks away from the actual site. And at the same time, there was a lot of um, interesting discussion around development that was going to happen along the Lower East River. And I just started thinking about what if all of this could be a cohesive plan that really thought about people's experience in the place and maximized the ability of small businesses to thrive. And it kind of kick started my whole thinking around, urban design, placemaking, and just, I think I've probably said this to you before, but I think of my career as sort of spiraling in or circling in on this whole idea of connecting people and places and just optimizing that intersection.
It makes complete sense. Like, I grew up in Manhattan, right? And I never
Mhm.
really had context besides, like for me, urban planning was like lights and streets and parks and really fundamental things. I didn't and that we don't get situations like the village where streets are going in random directions, right? So urban planning to me was about a grid and like flow. And I now understand there's a lot more depth to urban planning. Like, what was it like you grew up in New York? Did you grow up in New York?
I grew up in New Jersey.
In New
Hmm.
Jersey, yeah. I mean, yeah. Okay, so same metro. So like what, anything in your life, like in your early stage, that really drew you to this as well, like something that attracted you to the space?
I grew up with a dad who's an architect by training, and he would flip historic houses. And it just taught me to always see the opportunity in a building. And I kind of just love that. I love just walking into a space or just a place in a city and thinking about what could make it better. So to me, that was it just was really fundamental to how I've learned to look at places.
Yeah, totally. That I could totally relate. Like,
Just being lucky enough to live, and spend time in New York, you learn so much about cool urban design in that way.
no, absolutely. And so you've had a lot of amazing career highlights, right? So you did a placemaking thesis at NYU,
Mm-hmm.
and that I
Have my
think
glasses
was
on right now.
right. You did construction management.
Mhm.
Obviously, you got your MBA from Yale, the President Management Fellow for the U.S. Department of Commerce. In commercial real estate, you've done a lot of repositioning of assets. Can you explain, like, what does that mean to somebody? Like, what is like repositioning assets? Like, what does this work mean to a citizen, to somebody walking around their city today? How did you impact their lives?
I might have impacted their life in where they work. So, there's a lot of old building stock that people are still going to work in every day. And there's a whole range of things that can be done to that building to just improve your daily experience in it. And it might be something like redesigning a lobby, creating an outdoor tenant space or a parklet in front of a building that just
Hmm.
allows you to have the chance to work outside during the day. Thinking about what amenities go into your building. So maybe you didn't have anything before, but now you've got this great tenant lounge that gives you another option to work in during the day, for example. It's really about just taking a building, a lot of buildings that have that old green marble or pink granite, that kind of 1990s look that was very
Hmm.
popular,
Yeah,
and repositioning them to just better serve the people who have to spend most of their waking hours in them,
totally.
at least pre-COVID.
Yeah, right, right. Well, we're going to talk about this in a second, but like, placemaking extends beyond the office place, obviously, and
Yes.
extends, right, especially now in this world that we're in. So before we jump into that, I want to get more background into like how you got into the space, because I think like, as a kid who grew up in New York, again, like urban planning wasn't a discipline that was that was visible to me, right? It was like
Mhm.
finance and all these other obvious things, and now tech. And so I want to talk a bit about like how did you? Because I rarely see in this space today. It's rare to find female executive leadership,
Mm.
and you've squarely put yourself in a fantastic spot, and clearly on your skill sets. But like, how did you break in? Because I'm sure there's other people looking in to this to the discipline and wondering like, is this a space for me?
Mhm. I think it can be hard, especially for younger women, or women in general, because they might not be networking in the same ways or same places as a lot of the people who are already in that space and hiring for that space. But I was really lucky at the beginning. You mentioned I started in construction management. I started at Turner Construction in New York. And when I was getting hired, it was really at a time when the company was kind of um, making a concerted effort to bring women into the workplace and into their workforce. So I had that benefit. I got to, maybe not so much on my job sites, but I knew that I was part of a class of other women who had all started at the same time. And I think that really made a difference, that they had made that sort of executive level decision to start bringing people in. And that kind of got me started in this whole built environment world.
That's awesome. That's awesome, and it really is true, right? It really takes these organizations opening doors to bring
Mhm.
in more diverse talent and to build up this new thoughts into the space that
Mhm.
weren't that were have been missing for decades. So let's define placemaking, because we're going to go into this right now. You gave
Yeah.
me a definition. Do you want me to just read it, or do you have it handy?
I have it handy.
Okay, great.
This is just, I love talking about this because I think that maybe for the average person they haven't necessarily heard this term a lot, but it's actually sort of an ancient idea. It comes from the Latin genius loci, which is really referring to the protective spirit of a place. And so I just love thinking about that people have stood somewhere and really felt the experience of a place that was intentionally designed for over 1,000 years. I think that's super cool.
Wow.
But now, I think, especially in the world of placemaking, there's a lot of talk around, you're not just creating or making places, you're also elevating what's already there. And that's, one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about the office building really being a part of a neighborhood. To me, it's that connection, it's that authenticity of recognizing where you're developing or where you're working and placemaking, that it has to fit into the larger context of what's happening, for it to
Mm-hmm.
be successful and for it to actually elevate, the entire community. And then I've kind of taken that concept and applied it to, more traditional office buildings and things like that, really that repositioning we were talking about.
Yep, yep, yep. Yeah, that's awesome. And like urban planning, like it's been around for a long time, but was there a
Yeah.
time where it really became like a discipline, or it like it's like this is something that we're going to now
The
like
1960s were really kind of like the start of this. And it was because, in cities like New York, big roadways, as you were saying, came through, like the FDR Drive and the BQE, and they cut through a lot of existing neighborhoods. And so that kind of spurred this whole conversation. And I know that you're reading Jane Jacobs right now, which I think is
yeah,
awesome. And that's really a seminal work. Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's kind of the grandmother of urban planning for me, the fairy godmother of urban planning. So um, that was really the time when the conversation really started about placemaking, preserving place, preserving historic buildings, those things that kind of contribute to our daily life. And it's interesting because it started in that context, in more of a community development, urban planning context. And then it kind of transitioned into architecture in the 80s and 90s, kind of made its way into, multifamily in the early 2000s, and it's just kind of eking its way in. So I think hopefully now we're finally recognizing it in the work environment, but it's been evolving for about 50 plus years now.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so now let's shift now how this really applies to business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're in this time in this world where things are really changing, and we'll get to maybe like the new normal. But for now, I want to talk about like how is this impacting the workplace strategy, right? So we have this new discipline. We have urban planning. We have cities changing. We have markets evolving. We have people leaving the major urban metros. How is this affecting placemaking today, and how do we see this affect people's lives today, like right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's interesting, to talk about the new normal, but one of the things I've been saying for the last few months, 7 months, is that we're really just seeing an acceleration of trends that were kind of already starting, over the last 5 years. And I would say one of them is that mobility of companies and the mobility of workforce. So even before this, we saw companies really chasing talent that they needed, when they were looking at new sites, expanding or relocating their offices.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think part of the sort of precursor to that is that people are more mobile now. We're moving to places that we want to live. We don't necessarily have to live, in New York to get the job that we want to work on the thing that we want to be doing.
Right.
And so to me, placemaking, the value of placemaking has just been heightened because it's those secondary and tertiary cities that we're talking about now, as people are like, whoa, I need more space. I cannot be in my 700 square foot apartment anymore.
Right.
And they're moving out to different cities. But it's the cities that have really invested in creating a sense of place and invested in their cultural institutions and just, the programming that they're doing, that are really the winners in this moment because they've been attracting talent for a while. They've got that reputation. And ultimately, I think that's going to be a major permanent shift that, or at least a cyclical shift that we're going through
Yeah.
right now to move to more tertiary and secondary cities.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the data that we see at Local Logic is very telling to this fact, right? And personally speaking, not to take a data point of one, but I started working here remote in California two years
Mm,
ago, and you're right. Like in the Bay Area, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, you already had Facebook and Google buying huge plots of land off outside Austin, outside in
mhm.
Texas, where they could get a different quality of life, different cost of their workforce, and also of real estate. I mean, their real estate costs in the Bay Area were off the charts, and if they wanted to really grow and expand, they needed to look at these other markets. Like Austin, I would say is probably on your list, right? Of like
Mhm.
cities that
Oh,
have
definitely. And I lived
made
in Austin, so I can definitely attest to that influx of people from California. It's interesting too because just from a site selection perspective, not only is it the placemaking and the cost of living and cost of doing business, but part of that is just the tax and government structures that are set up to attract those businesses. So that's another piece of it.
100%. 100%. Yeah, I mean Texas being, no, was it no federal tax there? Is that what it is? Or no state income tax, right?
No
Is that?
state income
Yeah,
tax.
yeah, no state income tax, and
It's
Florida
another
too, right?
reason why Nashville's done so well.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
awesome, awesome. Yeah. So, what other cities like? So, yeah, on this topic, so what are the cities that people maybe are surprised to find out in the next 2, 3 years are going to be big winners out of this? Do you have any thoughts
I
or?
guess I don't think of it as a surprise, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because I think it's all things that have started to happen already, and I think cities like Nashville and Austin and sort of those warmer um, secondary and tertiary cities are doing really well. Asheville in North Carolina, a
Yep.
lot of the North Carolina cities. And then you're seeing some kind of cool, like arts driven communities like Fort Wayne in Indiana, Cleveland. Um, these kind of cities are just attracting people who want to stay in the general area, but want to be somewhere that they have a chance to kind of do that creative thing that they've been looking to do and can't afford to do it in
Yeah.
a larger city.
And yeah, and with space, and
Mm-hmm.
outdoors. Like I moved to Montreal and I chose not to move into the city because I wanted more space and I wanted room for my kids. And thankfully, like I did that, right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right now. Um, and so, great. I really love this topic. So let's keep moving into this a little deeper. So let's
Mhm.
talk about like, are we ever going back to normal real estate, to normal life, whatever you want to call it?
Mm.
And like, what do you see in that space?
I would just emphatically say no, we are never going back to normal. At this point, we've been in this for 7 months, and that's a long time. I'll speak for myself, but I think that just by human nature, we've changed our habits, and to go back to the old normal, we would have to go through a whole new change, a whole change to just go back in time.
Right.
And I think, I did a podcast with Kay Sargent, who's the global head of workplace for HOK. And she was just like, did any of us think it was so perfect before? Like, why are we going back in time? This is to me such an opportunity to really rethink how we're interacting in our cities. There's the whole idea in Paris of the 15-minute city,
Hmm.
where the mayor there is taking the opportunity to say, you should be able to walk to everything, get to everything you need in 15 minutes. And that walkability, that experience of place, it's going to support, local businesses and really just be a quality of life thing. I think that
Right.
this is, we've all just made so many shifts in how we live our daily lives right now that I don't think we can go back.
Yeah. No, absolutely correct. Like and we'll dig into this a bit more, but um, I can tell you just what we've done here at Local Logic and what other companies have done. Look at Shopify. Shopify went full remote. Just yesterday, if not mistaken, Microsoft announced that they're going full
Mm.
remote with 140,000 and whatever, like hundreds, over 100,000 employees going full remote. And I still see companies who are saying stuff, oh, like we'll be back in the office in April, we'll be back in the office in May or June. And I'm
Well, you see that
wondering,
line moving further and further out, right?
and I'm wondering if like are they thinking about, and you brought this up yesterday, so I want to just like open this door for you.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about organizational psychology, which is actually happens to be my minor, like, and you brought it up
Great.
yesterday, like these are
Yeah.
things that like after 7 to 8 months of your company, a year for some people, by the time we get to
Mm-hmm.
next April of your
Mm-hmm.
company functioning, what does that do to your employee psyche? What does it do to your teams? And what does it do to the culture if you try to go back to something that's been a year?
You know, I and you're probably more of an expert on this than I am, but I just think from an organizational behavior standpoint, when you've allowed people to have that kind of flexibility for so long, especially, it's really hard to take that away without, impacting morale negatively or demotivating your employees, because really when you're giving people that choice and flexibility, you're giving them the power to kind of control all these crazy things that are going on in their lives right now. And
Hmm.
I think it's hard to go back from that. I think you wouldn't want to go back from that. And I recently heard um, a CEO from, I think it was one of the banks, something a little more traditional, saying, if I don't offer this flexibility and my competitors do, then all my good talent's just going to go over there.
Right.
It's not, you're not going to be able to compete for talent. if you're not on the right side of this decision.
No, yeah, totally true. And now there are some folks in the industry that are putting out surveys that are saying the opposite, that are saying that people want to go
Yeah.
back to the office, people want to go back to work. Like what are you seeing here? What are your thoughts on that?
It's really interesting. I think first and foremost, I try to look at who's doing the survey, who they're actually, what that sample size and who they're actually talking to entails. Because I think that you have to look at the incentives for how people are interpreting the data, right?
Right.
If you're coming from a commercial real estate firm or somewhere in the industry that it behooves you to show that people want to go back and take as much office space as possible, I just have to kind of look at those incentives and think, is this really the way that that data would shake out? I've been looking at more consulting firms who have looked at, tens of thousands of samples across their different client base. And I think that overall, I'd say probably around 75% is the average of people who want to continue working remotely at least 2 to 3 days a week, even
Yeah.
after this is over. The thing that's been really surprising to me is who is saying they want to be back in the office more. I was originally thinking, just with the health concerns, that maybe it would be older people who would want to be back, or just kind of like old school culture, they'd want to be back in the office. But you're seeing a lot of sort of the newer employees who are saying, I'm having a hard time getting the face time that I need with my boss. I'm, maybe not having as many opportunities for that tacit learning that happens when you can just kind of like sit in on meetings and observe what's happening. So it's been a really interesting, kind of information unveiled by these surveys. But I think overall, the big thing is people still want some flexibility and control over their lives.
Absolutely. And I want to like talk back to that point. So
Mm-hmm.
75% that you said earlier, 75% of people in the consulting firm surveys that you've seen are
Mm-hmm.
saying they prefer remote work and then maybe going to the office, like basically half the time. So 2 to 3 days remote, two, three
Mm-hmm.
days in the office. And it's very, again, like, this is very similar to what we see here at Local Logic and what we're doing. We're doing, we're going remote first culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so this basically means that we are optimizing communications, we're optimizing our tech so that we can cater to remote employees first while having the optionality and really changing what an office means, right?
Yes.
And even is, I think you had mentioned this yesterday, like like one of your associates may have said, like, should the office be a word we even use anymore,
Yeah.
right?
It,
Like,
it
what's
seems.
it for?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think so much of the conversation now is really just totally blowing up what we thought of as like the why are we going to the office? How are we using the office? When do we even need to be in there? And one of the other things that I think a lot of these surveys have unveiled is that by and large, people, and even I think you're seeing CEOs coming out and saying this, productivity has not really dropped,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I think that we're facing a lot of burnout, which, you and I have talked about, but um, by and large, productivity hasn't dropped. And I think it's interesting because companies need to sort of invest in planning to actually make this shift, this remote first shift, or even a hybrid shift that you're talking about, because
Right.
I think that we sort of ripped off the band-aid, depending on where you live, sometime in March, by and large, and went to this, oh, we're all working from home, let's just try to make the best of the situation and see how it goes. And then we're all like, oh, we can
Right.
do this. We're adopting this digital transformation of how we work and how we do business at a much faster rate. And oh gosh, you've seen those memes where they're talking about March was a whole decade in and of itself, and like July the longest decade. And I've just been thinking about how if we had not had this kind of world situation happening, we would have taken maybe a decade to make some of the shifts that we're talking about right
Oh,
now,
totally.
right?
100%.
So
100%.
March was a really crazy decade, and we really made some big transformations. But one of the things I was going to say about productivity was, BCG came out with this really interesting 4 points that they identified employees feel like their productivity is, successful, doing great if, they have social connectivity, if they have physical health and mental health taken care of, and if they're being given the tools to actually do the work that they need to be doing. And I think that was really interesting to me, because I think you can solve for all four of those, remote or in person. And
That's
maybe historically companies are used to relying on physical space, or they haven't really seen it as their responsibility to care about physical or mental health.
right.
Um, but I think we have found ways to approach that as organizations, and we've also found ways to do that virtually. And I think that that's really going to be the game changer in going to remote work or having a successful hybrid ecosystem of
Yeah.
workplaces.
Yeah, for those watching, one, feel free to comment and ask questions. I just want to throw that out there. Our chat should work, and I'll see it. Two, I want to just talk a little bit again, just to give some perspective from inside a tech company, and also from what I know in my sphere. Slack is rolling out at the end of this
Mm-hmm.
year more productivity tools that allow to afford for this. Mental health. Part of it's like avoiding Zoom fatigue, which is a real thing.
Yeah.
And they're doing things like allowing you to do, asynchronous video. So you can post a video in your internal company Slack so that you can communicate with somebody without having to like pick up phone or book a meeting. You can send them like a message through Slack. You
Mm-hmm.
just today I saw Thrive Global launched a new tool with Zoom, which under their Zap platform, which allows people to take a moment, a minute of mindfulness at the start of a meeting built into the Zoom platform, because they're
That's super
acknowledging
cool.
that people need this like transition time. I'm going back to back, meeting to meeting, Zoom to Zoom, and creating a space. We've heard of companies who are doing, after their all hands, they end their all hands and they just do random breakout rooms so people can just have a chat. Because what's missing in this new world is the shoulder tap, is those conversations, and these are things that technology is solving. And
Mm-hmm.
there's also obviously a lot of concerns going back to the office, with contact tracing, with spread, and people are scared of going back to the office. And who knows if that will be resolved next year or not. But there's new tech. I just heard of one yesterday called WorkSphere, which is built to tackle this. So people can pick their time in the office. They can do contact tracing for who was in on what day. And I think like we're gonna see the tools come out to really support this core environment of work from home, which changes real estate, changes the way real estate's bought and sold, changes the way cities are made, and changes the way places are made, which is why we're having this conversation. So I think it's like, all these things are accelerating right now. Who do you see right now that's doing it right? So who is taking these moments? Who is taking the situation, and maybe in general, not just from now, they've been doing it for a few years,
Mm-hmm.
and applying decisions that are changing the workspace.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I think that for a while, in this certain moment, we've seen companies really sort of pressing pause on making a lot of major real estate decisions, just because there's so much uncertainty, and things are changing so rapidly. They're trying to figure out, what do I do? But it's been really interesting to see who's come out and put a stake in the ground, right? And so um, I think there's certain things that are probably getting a lot more traction now. Like Gensler's talking about creating equitable workplaces, and HOK is talking about neurodiversity in their office design. And these are things that we probably we probably should have taken care of many years ago. That the average office is not really designed for everyone, and it's not really designed for the way that everyone learns, thinks, does work in the most productive manner. So I think that this is really an exciting time, that those major architecture firms are really pushing that conversation. I think that there's also, you know, you expect tech companies to sort of lead the way in
Totally.
adopting some of these more flexible
Right.
plans. But what I'm fascinated with is sort of the huge just variations in how we define flexibility now. Like you have Amazon saying, no, we're going to be office based, but you get to pick what city you're going to work in,
Hmm.
and then you have Dropbox being like, nope, we're going to be remote first, and figuring out how that's going to work. And then you have sort of more, what I consider to be more traditional companies. Fujitsu, obviously based in Japan, all of their Japanese offices are going to more of a teleworking remote model, which I just think you don't think about that happening
Wow.
in Japan, you know?
Wow. Wow. Totally.
Yeah. So I think that, and another thing that I think came out pretty recently is the Dutch banks are really making a statement on allowing the hybrid workplace. And you've got to think they have a huge presence in New York, for example, and that's going to be that offering of flexibility where maybe some of the people working in American banks are going to be like, oh no, I'd rather, you know, go to Deutsche Bank or Credit Suisse or something, you know?
Right. And we've heard the same thing in the real estate space. So I did this talk 2 weeks ago with brokerages in the space. And some of these companies had 15, 20 offices. And they're now moving to like hive models, to like, places where an agent can come, have a meeting, and leave. Right. They've shifted their whole culture to, daily stand-ups and Zooms. And I'm seeing a lot of non-tech companies go remote as well. And so I think, like, as we go towards the end of this conversation, what are takeaways? If you're a traditional real estate person, let's do three different people here. Traditional real
Yeah.
estate person. So we're thinking like real estate agent, right? Brokerage, who's out there now transacting, helping people make decisions about their home. What should they consider? And then we'll talk a little bit about like the companies. What should they be considering? And then developers, like what should they be looking at? So let's look at those three, and then we'll wrap after that.
So residential brokers.
Yeah, let's talk about residential agents and brokerages. Like, they're the ones who are selling the homes, who are sort of moving those monopoly pieces I talked about earlier on this board, right? And so they're now seeing huge revenue swings positive because people are leaving the city and buying in these suburbs.
Yeah,
What are
people need.
they what are they going to see as they go forward here?
Hmm. You know, I think that, and this is something I think Local Logic could probably pull data on. I'm really fascinated by what people are going to be looking to be near, right? So we've
Mm-hmm.
seen so many more co-working spaces pop up in the suburbs, and people want to work near home. Maybe not even in home, but certainly they need more space in their homes to be able to work. Um, but I think that just the things people are going to look to be near is going to change. So that'll be fascinating. Um, the second one was, I'm sorry, tell me your three
So it
people again.
was real estate brokerages, companies, and
Mm-hmm.
then real estate developers.
I think companies are going to need to really be self-aware because this whole idea of remote work might not work for everyone. It's not a one size fits all solution. And I think that it also, even moving to a hybrid model, you have to invest in rethinking the way that your culture is structured.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not going to work if your systems, your performance metrics are all based on sort of being in person, that presenteeism. And it's really an opportunity to kind of rethink how you're managing people, how you're taking a look at productivity, how you're fostering social connectivity amongst your employees. So I would just say, if you are going to make sort of a shift like that, it's more than just about real estate,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Totally.
Um, and then I think on the developer side, um, just thinking about multifamily, there's a lot. Those are developers who really were at the forefront of this whole amenitization thing that we're going through. They already get that, and I think it's going to be exciting to see what shifts there, because you have people who might be in a smaller space, but you're in a larger development that is already set up to provide amenities. And so what if that apartment building also had co-working space in it that you
Right.
got access to because you live in that building? And boom, you don't even have to leave the building. You're good to go, and you have all these different spaces to live and work in. I think on the office side, it's really, it's interesting because I think some companies will want to have that variety of spaces within their own space to be able to control access, especially now with health concerns. Um, but there's some who are, really using this as an opportunity to scale back what their footprint is. And they're going to be
Yep.
looking to landlords to provide a lot of that collaboration space or just the amenities that they want to provide. Because if you want to get people to actually come into the office, you have to make it be something that they're going to choose to do, right? With all these other options, it's no longer going to be okay to just be a cube farm. You really have to create an environment that people are going to want to choose. And that's going to take some investment right now. And frankly, what a better time to be actually building that when people aren't actually in the office in large numbers. This is a
100%.
great time, and it's the race to monetization is not going away.
And yeah, I really love this talk. Hopefully, the folks who are on got a lot of value on it. As we go to the end here, you know, we talked about placemaking, we talked about urban planning, we talked about how you got into this career. I think this has been super helpful. On the way out the door here, if you could do me a favor, what are some like core maybe authors or books that people can look at? And then where can they find you if they want to continue to learn about placemaking and learn about urban planning and see your great content that you're putting out?
Yeah, well, I would say please follow me on LinkedIn, Sara Maffey. And you can also follow me at hereanywhere.com. I'm about to launch my next podcast, also called Here Anywhere. So I'm really excited about that. We had talked about Jane Jacobs, and I think that as a starting point, if you want to really nerd out and get into the basics of this, like read her seminal work, The Death and Life of Great
Oh,
American
Great American
City.
Cities.
And
There it is. Yeah.
yep. And I think on the future of work side, um, I don't think there's a book out yet because it is changing so rapidly. But I'm currently in a course called Future Proofing the Office, and it's led by Dror Polig and Auntie D. Slumbers. And they are both well known in the industry for being, way ahead of the curve on what's happening. So I'd say check them out too on,
Great.
on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Awesome.
Mhm.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for this great talk. I hope the
Yeah.
folks listening and those watching later on learned a lot about urban planning, placemaking, the future of work. I think this is so relevant to everybody in the industry. And if you're in real estate or you have a kid who and you are in real estate, tell them to look at urban planning as a discipline. I think when you want to think about sustainability, changing the future of how cities look, this is where you will
Mhm.
do it, is in this field. And so I want to just encourage people to investigate it and look at it. And if you're a real estate agent, look at it. It can really inform you as to how your neighborhoods, how your cities, how your towns are changing, and how you can
Mhm.
affect that change too. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you everybody for
Thank
coming.
you.
Really appreciate it. Great talk. Talk to you all soon.